This short presentation will focus on culture and how it relates to the international market. And first of all, we're going to look at what is culture, levels of culture, which we'll be going over, high and low context cultures, and then some fundamentals and the difference between individualism and collectivism in culture. And we want to be able to apply these concepts to the personas that you develop. So in order for any marketer or any individual in that's dealing with other countries, that it's important to understand and be familiar with socio-cultural aspects of the market, which include, of course, culture. And what is culture? Culture is, it's learned, shared, and transmitted. These are just some textbook definitions that you may be interested in. It's a integrated system of learned behavior, and that's another characteristic. And it encompasses traditions, habits, religion, art, language, and the more established a nation is or a country, the older it is, the more it's going to have deep-seated cultures with respect to their traditions that sometimes can go over centuries. There's another factor we need to think about, though, and that is what is the subculture? And the subculture is it's an identifiable group within a culture, and it's an identifiable group that shares values amongst themselves. So every culture has subcultures, and those subcultures have different wants and needs, and sometimes different behavioral patterns, and also consumption patterns. This chart just basically shows how culture of a nation, a national culture, can affect the industry that we're involved with, also then an individual firm within the industry, and then it comes down to the individual themselves. The first concept we're going to discuss here that you're going to be able to, you're going to need to make a decision on, is the difference between low context and high context cultures. So let's define them. The low context is individuals rely on what is said and written for meaning. Contracts are very important in a low context culture. Everything has to be spelled out exactly. Individuals communicate exactly, and there really is no room for interpretation. In societies where people tend to have connections, but they're shorter in duration, perhaps less loyalty, shorter relationships. In these societies, cultural behavior and beliefs may need to be spelled out explicitly. So in a low context culture, if you're in a selling environment, if you have the lowest price, you might get the order because relationships tend to be shorter. So let's contrast high context cultures. High context cultures, individuals don't say and write exactly what they mean at all times. So that's something to keep in mind. There's what we call reading between the lines, if you will. Oops. And when you read between the lines, sometimes there's going to be meanings, and gestures and moods are part of that. And communicators in a high context culture pay attention to more than the spoken word. And they pay attention to interpersonal relationships, nonverbal expressions, physical settings and social settings. And there's a concept called saving face. So that would be more applied to high context cultures. So essentially, those from Northern Europe, I'm going to give you an example. Northern European countries will tend to have low context behavior, and people from China or Japan typically are engaged more in high context culture. So you're going to have to decide for yourself relative to the personas that you're working on. So some of the fundamentals, and we're going to focus on a few of these. How the society is organized, manners and customs, religion, beliefs, attitudes, all those things are part of the culture of a society. So in a material culture, that's really about the society's exposure to technology, which is part of the culture. Aesthetics, in terms of art, color, form, music, and food. It's not mentioned there, but food also. So then there's also social organizations, special groups, interest groups, age, the role of women in society, and the role of the collective, which we'll be talking about later. And manners and customs are part of it as well. A couple of things I want to mention on this slide is time. So I've done business with folks in South America, in Brazil to be specific, and I know that they are not as tied to time frames as other parts of the world are. It's okay to be 10 minutes late. And that's really what they have. I would to a meeting, and that's unacceptable in the US. So and also in Europe and where you guys come from, same thing. So time is looked at differently. Space, what about space between two people communicating? In this country, it's about a meter or 3 feet. We call it 3 feet. It's about a meter is an accepted space between two people communicating. When we go to Mexico, for example, or Saudi Arabia, the people get much closer together, and that can make people from the West, in particular, uncomfortable. And material possessions have to do with technology, like I said before. Friendship patterns follow cultural norms, and for example, in China, it's critical to establish a relationship with in a business transaction before business should be or can be done. In this country, there's less of that. Although I think around the world, people would rather buy from their friends, but in China in particular, trust has to be developed, and trust can't be rushed. And you really can't do business in China until a relationship is established. In the US, some of that's true, but I think there's also business can be more transactional. And in some countries, a handshake is acceptable, a verbal agreement is acceptable. And if you go to Northern Europe, you're going to find that you can't do that. You have to have a legally binding contract. So what's the difference between individualism and collectivism? In individualism, culture is a bunch of individuals that have their own interest at heart. The needs of the collective come the second place. Individuals are motivated by their preferences, needs, and rights. Personal objectives are more important than those of others. So again, an example would be US and most of Europe would probably be like that. although, okay, so let's go to the collective. The collectivism is describing the culture as consisting of closely knit, connected individuals. And individuals view themselves as part of a collective before they envision their own personal needs. The personal goals are secondary to the collective, and the link between members of the collective is very important. So where do you fall? Where does your culture, the country you come from, is it an individualistic country or a collectivist? Think about the personas you're developing. And you want to develop an analytical framework when we talk about culture. And so I advise you can watch this video. It's in the slides. You can't click it from the video here, but I have the static version of this presentation. I suggest you watch this video. It talks about different cultures around the world. What is self-reference criteria? I'm going to boil this down very quickly. Self-reference criteria really means that people believe that their culture is superior to other cultures. And that is a terrible way to think about culture. Think about culture as different. Your culture may be different than another culture. It doesn't mean it's better. It just means it's different. There is no such thing as an inferior culture. And so when we're doing business, in this case, we're looking at marketing, but we're doing business, we have to really think about some of these elements and what's going to resonate with the target that we're focused on. And so you have sometimes a country of origin can have a positive or negative can create a positive or negative impression, like watches from Switzerland, or perhaps engineering in Japan or Germany. The role of discounted pricing does affect different countries. Some countries, the bartering is part of the process of doing business. And in other countries, it's looked at as an insult. So you really have to know that. And how you distribute product and services can be affected by the culture. And promotion, advertising. Sometimes advertising can be offensive in some cultures and not so much in others. And I'm also going to ask you to watch this video. It's on learning culture the hard way. Again, it's in the static slides. You can click on it, and there's like a little it's like a quiz while you're taking the video, an informal quiz, and it's kind of interesting because it does go over some of the real basic cultural elements you will see from country to country, and how you can make really bad mistakes in business, and that would include hospitality. So now that gives you sort of an overview. I invite you to go back and watch some of the video I just directed you to. So the project work is to identify the cultural factors of your target country, and apply them to the personas. And you especially consider high or low context culture of the target audience. Okay. Also consider subcultures. What subcultures come into play when doing business? A subculture is a subgroup of a larger culture. It can be divided by religion. It can be divided by socioeconomic groups. It can be divided by tech people are a subculture. musicians are a subculture, surfers are a subculture, wine enthusiasts and foodies are subcultures. So these groups have different consumption habits. So I'd like you to add those points to your persona. Think about it, try to get it right. And if I think you're off a little bit when I see your personas, when you submit them, I'll know that that I need to hit this a little bit harder with you. But otherwise, that is the end of the presentation. And I appreciate your attention, and we will see you in the classroom.